Welcome to A Healer in Every Home. My name is Burke Lenahan, and we're very fortunate to have with us today as our guest Dr. Emily Chan, a naturopathic physician from Laguna Beach, California. She's here today to tell us about memory loss in older people and even Alzheimer's and what we can do about it. So Dr. Chan, I understand that 80% of older Americans with memory loss do not talk to their doctors about it. Why do you think that is, and what can we do about it?
Well, a lot of people don't talk to their doctors because of embarrassment. It's embarrassing when you can't find your keys or you can't come up with words that you used to be able to. It feels even worse to that patient themselves, where they feel like they're just fumbling over things and they're not themselves like they used to be. And oftentimes it feels more exaggerated to them than it really is to other people. One big issue is fear. So sometimes when there are these symptoms, it's just really scary. And some people react to that fear in a way of just hiding it or hoping it's going to go away without doing anything about it. But the problem is that with a lot of dementia or some of these neuronal diseases, even let's say Parkinson's disease, for example, 90% of those neurons in the dopamine pathways that are responsible for that issue are dead by the time somebody has symptoms. So it's kind of a good thing that our brain is made so redundant with a lot of backup plans, backup systems, but also you can take that to your advantage by dealing with it earlier and preventing, so that less of those brain cells have already been damaged by the time you get to it. And there's a lot of prevention that we can do naturally. We can talk about that, as well as if you already are experiencing some memory loss, we can also tell you some things that you can work on.
Right, to reverse it. So the same supplements and so forth could work to both prevent and also reverse this memory loss. I'm wondering if another reason people don't talk to their doctors is because conventional medicine doesn't have really good solutions. They're not really good drugs for memory loss. And I'm thinking of a recent study, it just came out a couple of months ago in early 2014, in which it was a long-term study, a 5-year study of about 600 patients in 4 different arms of the study. One group was given a very common drug that's used for Alzheimer's called memantine. Another group was given vitamin E. And it wasn't just a simple vitamin E you might get in the drugstore. It was the mixed tocopherols, this is so important, mixed tocopherols and mixed tocotrienols, which are so it's a very complete E complex. 2,000 units, which is really a huge amount, but it's safe because it has all the elements of the E complex. Another group was given both substances, and the 4th group was given nothing, a placebo. And interestingly, well, the first interesting thing that came out of this study was that the drug did absolutely nothing. There was no improvement in the people after 5 years of taking this drug every day. Another interesting thing was that vitamin E helped so much. One way they measured that was that the caretakers of these elderly people needed to give 2 hours less care per day. So that showed that the people were functioning better.
That's very significant.
It's very significant.
Yeah.
If you're the person taking care of them, it's really significant. But then the sad thing was that the people on the drug and vitamin E, the drug completely canceled out any benefit of vitamin E. So not only was the drug not helping, it was actually causing harm by preventing the vitamin E from working. So, so vitamin E, obviously, as I mentioned, 2,000 units, I would never start with that. You could work up to it very gradually, and you want to make very sure to get the mixed tocopherols, mixed tocotrienols. And I'm also thinking about the importance of good quality fats, because E is fat soluble, so we want to be sure to get very good quality fats. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, so the brain is made out of 60% fat.
It's a lot of fat, so it's got to be good fat.
Yes,
yeah.
And modern day there's been more problems with memory loss or even other types of brain problems with younger people, like ADHD, anxiety, depression, because we don't have enough fat in our brain. And the brain needs that for food. And because of that, it's really important I teach people what good fats are, because obviously we know that there are some fats, like your trans fats, the fried foods, that cause a lot of oxidative stress. So when there are pro-oxidants like that, of course that's going to damage the neurons through oxidative stress, so we don't want that. But that's not to say to avoid fat. We really need some good fats in our diet. And fats such as avocado would be really good. Avocado actually has a lot of vitamin E that you were talking about in it. And vitamin E, as you know, works as an antioxidant to the body and to the brain. And so that would be a very good source of a food of fat. Another good source is coconut oil. Now, coconut oil, with some research, has been shown to be beneficial for reducing Alzheimer's and dementia. Coconut oil also has a lot of other anti-inflammatory benefits along with it as well.
There's actually a whole book by Dr. Mary Newport about how she helped her husband with Alzheimer's by giving him coconut oil and reversed the symptoms of Alzheimer's in her husband. Yeah, people could look that up.
It's so simple. Let food be your medicine,
delicious.
Right?
Yeah.
Another one really important are omega-3 oils. Now, omega-3 oils, it's really important to mention that there are different types. So you have EPA and you have DHA. Now, those are usually the therapeutic oils that we want. DHA is really more specific as a food for the brain. EPA is anti-inflammatory to the whole body, so in effect it is also good for the brain. So we want both of those. Now, flax oil is also a omega-3 oil, and a lot of people take that, and flax is good. It has a lot of other benefits, but if you're taking it for the conversion of flax to EPA to DHA, it's really not effective. Because in women, if you take 1 part of flax oil, only 1/10 of it gets converted to those EPA and DHAs. And in men, it's even worse. It's 1 out of 20. So that's just not the most effective source. So you do want to take a fish oil, EPA, DHA, kind of in a more balanced proportion, especially for the brain, so that you're getting that amount of DHA.
Right, so the fish oils are ideal, but of course, I'm a vegetarian. Some vegetarians don't want fish oil, so another source would be algae, because that's where the fish get it from. And you can actually buy algae-based essential fatty acids now.
Yeah, that's great to know.
Yeah, and if people really love the plant-based ones like flax oil and hemp oil and chia seeds and things like that, that's great. If they like them enough to eat a lot, then the low conversion ratio won't matter so much. So some people have made them a major part of their diet, and that's good too.
That's good too. And there are also other benefits of different types of oils besides omega-3s. You have your evening primrose oils. You have different oils from, say, nuts and seeds. Walnuts are one of the nuts that has the highest content of omega-3s of all of the nuts.
And they look like little brains. That's a funny thing. They're good for the brain.
And you know, with there's a study called the Rotterdam study, and it shows that people who will eat just 1 serving of fish a week reduce their chances of Alzheimer's by about 60%.
That's enormous.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah.
But with nowadays, there's a lot of toxicity in our ocean, and that's kind of one problem with fish also. So could you talk to us a little bit about heavy metals and some of that and how that relates to the brain?
Toxins in general for the brain.
Toxins.
Yeah, it's a concern because, you know, if the brain is largely fat, and fat is where the body stores toxins, we have to be especially careful with toxins going into the brain. I'm thinking about all the things in our world that are neurotoxins, beginning with things like artificial sweeteners. One thing people should totally avoid, artificial sweeteners. There are stories of people with MS that have been able to reverse their symptoms just by stopping their Splenda, NutraSweet, things like that. There's sucralose, aspartame. So, and then another source would be things like household chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, you know, the kind of things you'd use in the farm or garden. I've had clients with major neurological diseases like Parkinson's or MS that grew up on a farm, and I had clients describe the crop duster plane flying over while they were playing in the fields, where they were constantly being exposed to these really heavy concentrations of these, what we now know are very toxic neurotoxins. And so people could do a detox for that. There are ways to do, like, especially a liver detox to kind of move these up and out and get them out of the body. And then heavy metals, as you mentioned, are another problem. I'm thinking first of aluminum, because aluminum has been identified in the beta amyloid plaques of Alzheimer's. It's hard to say if it's causative at this point, but we can say it's definitely associated with it. So it's a huge cause for alarm, because aluminum is a neurotoxin. And there are many sources in our daily life. There's aluminum cookware, even stainless steel cookware, where the aluminum is clad in stainless steel, it gets worn off, and there is aluminum coming out of it after it's been used for a while. Commercial deodorants, this is why people buy a natural deodorant from the health food store. And another thing, of course, mercury in fish. We want to be careful with the larger kind of cold water fish, the swordfish, the albacore tuna, things like that. The smaller the fish, the kind of the lower on the food chain, the less likely it is to have mercury in it. And then another source of mercury, of course, is vaccines, and we've been told mercury has been taken out of vaccines. A very common source now is the flu shot. If people go to a clinic and there are multiple doses from the same vaccine, it will be preserved with mercury. But the other thing is that as the vaccine manufacturers took mercury out, they put aluminum in, which if anything is worse than mercury, it's a worse neurotoxin. So we do have to be, so many sources of heavy metals in our world that we have to be careful. And there are detoxes that we can do to get rid of the heavy metals. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how about diabetes and blood sugar and that whole connection with kind of damage to the brain and affecting our memory and concentration and all that?
Yeah, so this is fairly new, and a lot of people don't really connect your blood sugar to dementia. So we have, of course, your type 1 diabetes, we have type 2 diabetes. Now there's something called type 3 diabetes, where the blood sugar is affecting the brain and contributing to dementia. So if you think about the physiology with people who have diabetes, which is elevated blood sugar, too much sugar in the bloodstream will damage organs. So it's really common people who are diabetic will be worried about losing their foot because of gangrene or the kidney damage or the eyes, the retina, losing the eyes. But with the blood sugar, of course, you get that going to the brain as well in circulation. And what's happening is that that sugar is starting to damage your neurons. And so that's contributing to dementia. And a lot of times some people can already have that type of low-level damage without being diabetic. So I do tell my patients, don't think that just because you're not diabetic means that that doesn't apply to you. So if you're experiencing any type of blood sugar type of symptom, sometimes even lower blood sugar like hypoglycemia, that means your insulin response is not really good. And there's something called insulin resistance. And with insulin resistance, insulin's not working so well in the body, and so the body has to produce more. Well, too much insulin, too much of anything is not really good. Too much of it causes a lot of inflammation in the body and weight gain. So too much insulin can also contribute to the damage in the type 3 diabetes besides kind of the sugar level itself. And just with that blood sugar dysregulation will cause some of that insulin resistance going on. And so you can kind of know if you feel like you're always needing to eat something in order not to feel shaky or irritable, that there might be a blood sugar issue there. And what to do practically about that to protect your brain is to protect the balance of the blood sugar so that it's much more steady instead of going like a roller coaster of I'm hungry, it's super low, and then eating a lot of sugar, it's high, and then
you crash.
And then you crash. That's not good. So eating protein really keeps that blood sugar level steady. So
and the good
really
fats too
protein,
would help the steady burn.
Good fats and vegetables. The good fats prevent people from overeating. So when people eat fat, it talks to the brain, and there's a chemical called somatostatin that's secreted, and it tells your brain that I'm full, I don't need to eat more, so you won't overeat. If people eat a low-fat diet, they're so hungry.
Oh, people gain weight on low-fat diets. Plus, of course, a lot of sugar is added to low-fat products. Yeah, there's this documentary that's just come out called Fed Up, I think, with Katie Couric, and one of the things they talk about is how when about 20 or 30 years ago when the low-fat craze started and the food didn't taste that good, the food manufacturers figured they could just keep adding sugar, and they started adding sugar to all kinds of things that weren't traditionally sweetened with sugar, and then they noticed that Americans kept eating more and more and more. And so they kept adding more sugar.
They added more sugar. And with addition of sugars are really dangerous. Some people have the sugar-free, like the aspartames, but those are cancer-causing. And there's a study saying that people who start to have diet sodas and drinks, they actually might gain 30 pounds in a year because of just some of the chemical signaling. So that's not that great. And one more thing to mention about the brain and dementia with regards to sugar is some people feel that fruits are very sugary and they're very afraid of eating them. So really 1 to 3 fruits a day is not too much of a problem because fruits have a lot of fiber and minerals in it. And because of that, it really slows the absorption of the sugar in the body. So fruits have a lot of other benefits to them as well.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that like the kind of more old-fashioned type of conventional dietitians would say a serving of fruit could be a serving of fruit juice or even a fruit juice sweetened drink, And with the fruit juice, then there isn't all the fiber there to slow it down. And they really are not equivalent.
They are not.
First of all, if it's canned or processed in any way, it doesn't have the nutrients. But also it's going to hit the body in a different way because fruit juice is going to be very quickly absorbed. That's why they use orange juice to rescue a diabetic who's in very low blood sugar, because the orange juice will be absorbed so fast But most of the time you don't want that effect. You want the sugar to be absorbed slowly. So you want to eat a wonderful fruit that has a lot of fiber in it. I'm thinking of dark cherries, for example, is a good example.
Absolutely.
But yeah, all fruits and vegetables have wonderful fiber in them.
Wonderful. So another thing that is really important with dementia would be the intestinal tract. Now, people would be so surprised about that, but the intestinal tract is very important to the correlation to the brain. 70% of the immune system is in the intestinal tract. And there's this new area of study called psychoneuroimmunology, where the brain is really affected by the gut and the immune system. And now people are having studies that are showing that intestinal health, the bacteria in the gut, is very much related to being able to benefit or not benefit ADHD, dementia, and anxiety. These 3 areas, it's studied. And the reason for that is that the intestinal tract will communicate via the immune system to the brain. And we have more serotonin in the intestinal tract than in the brain. So you can see how it's really kind of a gut is your brain child, so to say. And it's very important to nourish the gut. A lot of times when people have an inflamed gut or they have a permeable gut, like leaky gut, that nutrients are not really absorbed. And that when the gut is inflamed, there are different chemicals that are secreted that communicate to the immune system a different message than if it was not inflamed. And so some practical things that are really important to do would be, for example, avoiding eating a lot of wheat products, because studies are showing that wheat products in people that are, even not celiac, just normal gut, tend to increase the permeability. So that's something to have a little bit less of in relation to kind of protecting that gut. Because if the intestines are permeable, it's very, very likely also that the blood-brain barrier is permeable, and that a lot more of the oxidative stresses, the toxins that we're exposed to, can cross the blood-brain barrier and damage the brain and the neurons, contributing to, faster dementia if you're prone to it than if that was intact. So if we keep our guts from being leaky by using things like acidophilus probiotics, that's one thing that you can really do. There are studies that say that by just taking probiotics, some of those neurological symptoms can be changed.
And you want a high potency one, right, and broad spectrum that has more than one organism in it, right?
Yeah, generally, generally. So higher potency might be even 30 billion for some people, 15 to 30 billion, but sometimes it depends person to person. Also important is we sometimes need some prebiotics. So for some people, they cannot cultivate the flora in the gut, and things like sauerkraut, for example, fermented foods are really good. Sauerkraut, kimchi, but you don't want to get that with preservatives.
These are fresh. And fresh sauerkraut, too.
Yes,
right?
are things that help the probiotics
vegetables.
grow.
So prebiotics, I think, are things that provide the food for the probiotics, or they pave the way or kind of create a nurturing environment, let's say, for the probiotics. And I think also that the more destructive bacteria secrete toxins that can directly affect the brain. And I'm thinking of candida. Some people with a big problem with candida in the gut will describe getting very foggy-brained if they eat some sugar. And it's because there is something coming from the candida in the gut that actually goes to the brain and makes them feel foggy-brained.
Yeah, it's the toxins of that organism that can kind of go. So again, all the toxins from the bad bacteria and candida will talk to the immune system. It activates the immune system to want to fight more. When that's activated, it activates the nervous system. You're going to get more of something called glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And when you have too much glutamate, don't confuse that with glutamine, which actually helps heal the gut. And
it's another thing people can take.
Which actually helps. But glutamate is not good. And there's correlations with having too much glutamate, like too much excitation in the brain. So people have even too much anxiety, too much glutamate, that kills the neurons. And when you predominantly and consistently have too much glutamate, you're gonna be more prone to memory loss than if you didn't. So that's really important.
So MSG, monosodium glutamate, is one source. Are there other ways that people would get too much glutamate, or is it something the brain is making because you're anxious? Or
you're making too much glutamate, so you can make that yourself. So by just being really stressed out, you're going to make a lot of glutamate. And if you take vitamin B6, though, it will convert the glutamate away and into something called GABA, and GABA is a calming neurotransmitter, and that would be protective for the brain, and it, you can take away all the oxidative damage from excessive amounts of glutamate.
So the B vitamins, and especially B6, would help prevent this damaging effect on the brain, let's say.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And folic acid also, because it prevents mutations and all of that from happening, so it's very protective.
And food allergies, maybe, or other effects of food allergies, or other factors?
Yeah, absolutely. So food allergies, when you're constantly eating foods that your immune system has a reaction to, it can cause the intestinal tract to be more permeable. So we talked about that in relationship to the brain again.
Letting the toxins in and so forth,
And with a lot of food allergies, people kind of think of anaphylaxis, like your throat closing up or getting a runny nose, but a lot of times there are sensitivities where there are foods that create this low level of inflammation. So some people may or may not notice it. Sometimes people might feel just a little bit more tired after eating the food, or just very mild symptoms that may or may not be noticeable. And because there are different types of sensitivity in the immune system, some are immediate and some can occur even 48 hours after eating. So sometimes it makes it really hard to tell.
It sounds like if people wanted to try one thing to avoid, it would be gluten, I think, is having the most dramatic effect on leaky gut and leaky blood-brain barrier. They could try gluten-free.
There's just so much research on gluten and the effects of dementia, multiple sclerosis. There's been miracle stories of patients with MS lesions that were shown on MRIs, and after doing one thing of just avoiding the gluten, some of the lesions disappeared, and the doctors were just so surprised that that happened. But that's just one thing, because the immune system was producing all these lesions with the immune attack. So, you know, I'm seeing a lot of that. I see some patients who have a lot of brain fog, and because of the brain fog, they seem to be more forgetful. And sometimes the brain fog can be from food allergies or candida, like what you said. And when we deal with that, all of a sudden their memory already increased a lot.
So, for example, Grain Brain by David Perlmutter would be a great book people could read about the gluten connection with the brain. Yeah. So I'm thinking of a few things from my own field, which is homeopathy, which is a kind of natural medicine. And there are a few of these natural medicines that have been used for a couple hundred years now, as people are getting older and they're starting to lose their memory. And again, the person would fit into a certain personality type. We call it a portrait of the person needing the remedy. One of them is, kind of for the earlier stages, is lycopodium. It's used for many, many things in homeopathy, but for the aging brain, it's used for people with a very specific kind of memory loss. It's called word hunting, where they can't remember proper nouns and they're fumbling for words. It's used for kids with dyslexia, a different type of learning or memory problem. But in older people, it's used for this kind of word hunting, or using the wrong word, like mixing up words and using a word that kind of sounds similar or means the wrong thing or whatever, or reversing things. When it becomes more serious, there's a remedy, Helleborus, and Helleborus is used when you ask the person a question and it seems like it takes a really long time for the question to penetrate. And then the person takes a long time to kind of pull themselves together and try to come up with an answer, and then it takes a long time for the answer to come out. And you see this sometimes with older people, this pattern of this kind of this delay in response, where the person seems very, very far away. So Helleborus is good for that. And a final one is called Burita Carb, and that's for an older person who they may have had a stroke, but they have severe memory loss, and they're starting to act more and more childlike. So sadly, I saw this in my father, who was a doctor. He retired and went into a kind of a decline of memory. Also a big personality change at the same time, to see this very dignified professional man begin to act like a small child. He would cry at the drop of a hat. He would rage and tantrum at the drop of a hat. He'd have these tremendous mood swings. He became very dependent on my mother in almost an infantile kind of way. This would be a Burita Carb kind of thing. And sadly, you know, we see this when people get in these very advanced stages. So there's the memory changes and cognitive changes, but also emotional changes. And another very typical thing of people needing this remedy is that they get very self-conscious. They think that other people are looking at them, talking about them, maybe laughing at them. But the fact is we were looking at him and talking about him and thinking, how are we going to help him? Do we need to send him to a nursing home? He was, like many older people, terrified of going into the nursing home. So there's some justification for it when people have this kind of self-consciousness. But it's very painful when people are aware enough to see how much they're failing, but they're not actually able to do anything about it. And if I had been able to give my father, the doctor, a homeopathic medicine, that's what I would have given him, burrito carb.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So I think we need to wrap up now, and I'm just going to mention that some of these things people can get in the health food store. What I just mentioned, people can get in the health food store. Things like B6 they can get there.
And
but
some
other
herbs
things
as well.
And herbs, yes. Oh yes, tell us the herbs for.
Yeah, so actually there are some herbs that are really great. One that's very good for memory is bacopa and also holy basil. And they have the energetic properties also for helping with calmness, peace, having some faith in life, works with anxiety. So for people who have Alzheimer's or real dementia, you know, we're doing some other things to support. Some people, I do want to mention, have memory loss, and that's actually a dysfunction of the brain from stress, going into fight and flight response where their brain is going to survival mode and they can't think. So blood flow is not going to the part of the brain that allows them to think, and thus they feel like they're not recalling, they're not absorbing what people are saying, they're not present in a conversation. In that case, with some of my younger patients in their 40s or even 30s with that type of memory problem, bacopa and holy basil would be really beneficial because it helps that blood flow to the brain, and it also helps with balancing the nervous system for the calm. Another couple herbs would be ginkgo and glutathione. Those really increase blood flow to the brain and it helps with focus and concentration. Just be careful with the ginkgo though, that it thins the blood. So if people are older people taking blood thinners, that's one caution about that herb. And lastly, to mention, rosemary is really a nice fix immediately for if you feel like you need to wake up, focus a little bit better. Using that in a form of an aromatherapy oil.
So they're inhaling it.
Yeah.
And immediately feeling this mental lift from it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So those are some things that people can try. Yeah.
And so there are more things if people go to a professional, like a naturopathic doctor, functional medicine doctor, they can get their neurotransmitters tested and so forth. You could do an individualized profile for them. So I'm just going to mention that you do Skype and phone consults for people all over the country. So thank you so much. This has been A Healer in Every Home with Dr. Emily Chan. I'm Burke Lenahan. Thank you so much for joining us.